So today is August the 7th, 2018. We're going to be talking about why you should consider adding small grains to your operation to maximize cover crop benefits. Now that title is about as long as you can make a title, but I couldn't figure out how to shorten it to say what I wanted to say. So it's one of those topics that can get a little interesting when you start talking to people, especially for farmers who may be kind of really locked into their rotation and they don't want to screw that up at all. And I understand that, but some of the typical things that we hear from people is, well, I'm not going to grow small grains because there's no money in it. And to be fair, if there was a lot of money in, probably everybody would be planting them. So that's I'm going to acknowledge that right up front. Also, a market limitation. That is another barrier and one that does need to be addressed. Although I think sometimes people use that excuse a little bit too casually. I don't really think they've tried or thought about how they could have a market. And maybe they're just too comfortable, like I said, with corn and beans or whatever their rotation is. I just don't want to change, and I get that too. But for farmers who want to maybe from their context think outside of the box or actually look at what a difference they could make by changing some things in their management by adding small grains. Now, I'm going to define small grains here as pretty much the barley, wheat, oats, triticale, like I'm going to talk a little bit about later, but kind of the common ones out there, ones that are harvested generally over the summer months. So obviously the majority probably would be wheat, but we're going to lump that all together today, and we're just going to talk about adding a cash crop to the crop rotation that is harvested in the summer, which is typically the small grains. So why would we want to think about that? What are some of the reasons here? Well, there's some stuff that's obvious. I think everybody would acknowledge, we're trying to build the soil biology is certainly a basic reason for doing this. And the whole aspect of diversity. Nobody says diversity is a bad thing. At least anybody who's really wrapped up in learning how soil functions and so forth. Diversity of cash crops, diversity of mixed species of cover crops, which obviously when we have a window to plant in the middle of summer, we got lots and lots of species that we can plant simultaneously to really take advantage of that opportunity. That's the reason to add small grains. Legumes for nitrogen production, because I will say this, I've said it often, the price of nitrogen's really, I'll just say fair right now, but everybody would agree that things happen in the world that are beyond our control, even from an agricultural standpoint. Some year, the price of nitrogen will be higher. I don't, again, say that as a threat. I just say it as good business sense to be looking at legumes for nitrogen production or some of our nitrogen production in our cash crop. This is an opportunity we have because in most of our cash crops, there's very little time to plant a legume. And so this is, again, why we would want to consider legumes for the nitrogen production aspects. And then if we're trying to increase our organic matter, we've lost half our organic matter over the last 100 years in this country. Why? Because too much tillage, number one, and number two, lack of diversity, I would have to say, is part of that. So, here's an option where we can insert that, another plant, in the context of a small grain and then follow up with cover crops to be able to address that issue of organic matter that either is decreasing or is stabilized at a lower level than it used to be. And then another one here I just have is we can fix or enhance bad fields or poor quality fields. Small grains give more of an option to be able to do that. And I am going to be showing you some data coming up here 4 different times I looked at the value that cover crops after a small grain will give to the following corn crop. The result is higher yields every single time, without exception. I've always had higher yields after a small grain and a cover crop for my corn. And I hear this repeatedly, and I guess it's probably the foundation of the premise why I say that this is something that you need to consider adding small grains to get more profit at the end of the year in the context of your cropping system. Now, there's a few other things here when we talk about adding why we add small grains. For some, there is some value in the straw. And I'm going to expound on that a little bit more in some pictures coming up here. So the value of the straw could be considered part of the cash crop. Now, here in the East, where I'm from, this is a significant value, and I will say sometimes more value than the grain itself, some years. I also understand not every area of the country has a market for the straw. Or do you even want to take that straw off because you want that straw for the soil? Now, I like to say that I've earned the right to be able to sell my straw. But then again, I'm in a higher rainfall area. I can get biomass produced. I can plant a cover crop, a mixed species cover crop immediately after harvest, and it can go about that way. So what's right for me isn't necessarily right for you, or vice versa. Another frequent use of small grains is to install tile after the harvest of the small grain. In the summertime, it's usually drier, better conditions to install tile. So that's kind of maybe one of the more popular reasons why some farmers have planted a cover crop especially in the Midwest, is a reason to install tile. But I'm just going to list it here. The other thing is if you have some perennial weed issues like thistles, hemp dog bane, dock, whatever perennial weed you have in your area, if you take a small grain off, leave it grow, and then the end of August, beginning of September, when it's getting ready, putting root reserves down for the winter, it's a great time to kill it with a herbicide because it's taking that herbicide down. It's a whole lot easier to kill a perennial weed in late summer than it is late spring or early spring. So this sometimes could be a reason to justify of putting a small grain in your rotation. Now, of course, most of these things I'm suggesting here there's compilation of multiple things here to make it really, really work. But I'll just tell you that I've used this strategy to get rid of some perennial weeds by using a small grain because you have a better chance to kill them. For those of us who have animals, spreading manure definitely gives you an option, and you can plant a cover crop right away to take up those nutrients. Compost. I get some mushroom soil in here. They want to get rid of that mushroom soil year round, and for me, it's an advantage because a lot of farmers do not want it during the summer. There's no room to put it, so I get a big discount. Sometimes it's free. They just dump it off here because there's no place to go. Well, I take my small grains off and I spread it, and everybody's happy. So that's just another option to do that. Now, I mentioned that I want to talk about the straw a little bit. This is just my place, and yes, we like our flex heads. We take it right down to the ground, and like we're cutting soybeans pretty much. And you may ask, what's the value? Because you're probably curious. This year I sold out of the field for $130 a ton, big bales. And that's a market that I have. I know that most of you probably don't have a market like that. I do. Some people have told me, well, I'm surprised, Steve, that you're actually taking that straw off. Isn't that valuable nutrients you're removing from your field? I'm like, you bet it is. I get that. I understand that. But I'm very high in phosphorus because mainly of historic manure use. I don't need it. I don't use as much anymore because the sources of that manure has dried up in my neighborhood. But that being said, I still have plenty of nutrients there. Plus, I've been in this system for 30 years now or more in some of my fields. And we got, looking for nutrients is not a big deal. And then as I'll show you some pictures here, we go right back in here and plant this with a multi-species mix. So as I said, I like to say I've earned the right to do that. One of the things that I've struggled with because of my high biological activity is to make sure there's more residue than just the stubble of the wheat or the small grain, whatever it is. This here is I took this picture intentionally that I like to set my fields up that I realize like if I plant my wheat into corn, which I don't tend to like to do, but I'll still have those corn residue on the ground. In this case here, if you look closely, you may be able to figure out this was a pumpkin field that had been rolled down with triticale. Now, if you see the old triticale stalks are still there, you see a few pumpkin vines left, no-tilled wheat into this residue, my soil is still covered. Now, there were times where I would have zero soil covered at wheat, except the standing stalks, and that's not much coverage. That's not good enough for me. This is my goal right there. What you see. So I'm giving you a few little things here that will show you what's behind my thinking and what I do. So I'm going to pause for a little bit. I'd appreciate if there's any comments or questions. Then I'm going to go in and I'm going to show you the data that I have on my farm. So I'm unmuting everybody and just wonder if there's any comments or questions up to this point.
Hey, Steve, this is Lloyd. Having your residue, isn't that a symbol or indication that your biology isn't working very well from previous year?
Well, that's a great question. My problem had been, Lloyd, that I was losing all the residue because of that. But you got to understand, this triticale was pollinating the year before. So that's fully mature. That's the difference. If I would have went in there and terminated that triticale at boot stage or less, there would be zero left. My experience has been once a cover crop, in this case a triticale, once it's fully headed, it's going to last about a year because the seed to end ratio is so high. And yes, I mean, trust me, you can look at my soils when you come visit my farm here. But I have learned the value of letting cover crops go full maturity if possible, and I can in my pumpkin fields. I can't so much in my corn fields, okay? But still, to try to be able to do that. So that's a great question, but I'll defend it by saying because it was mature cereal rye, it's still there. But that's an excellent question. Other comments, questions? Okay, we're going to move on. The next, I have a series here of 4 different slides that will show some of the research I've done. Now, this research, there was different things going on. I'm just showing you the context here of the effect of small grains. Now, some of these were comparing planting cover crops versus double crop soybeans after small grains. And that does depend what part of the country you're in. I happen to be kind of the northern edge almost, where they typically plant double crop beans after wheat. I'm not going to talk about that today. I got a webinar on that. You can go back and look at it if you want to. But I'm just showing this is some data from some of that. What I want you to see here is on the right-hand side is where there's some cover crops, in this case tillage radish and tillage sun, which is sun hemp, planted after in this case, wheat came off. And if you look over there all the way to your left, you'll see the control in red. That was no cover crop after the small grain. The effect we got there, you can see there was an increased effect. Now, in this experiment here, the second one in from the left is the dark blue. It says all the covers. That was a combination of all the different cover crop treatments we had done. So when you throw them all together, you got a really, really solid number. And in this case here, it's around a 10 or 12 bushel, I believe 12 bushel increase, what all the cover crops gave. Now, just a little bit of background. This is replicated 3 times in a field, so it's pretty good, solid data. So let's just move on to another one here. It's a different experiment. Now, on this one here, what you're looking at is the yield increase. The yield increase over the control. So we just want to really pay attention to the numbers on the charts on the right. Again, that was looking at radishes and sun hemp. There was the homestead is a mix of radish, sun hemp, and sorghum Sudan grass. The greedy beans is my way of talking about double crop soybeans. And I'll just say I am not against double crop soybeans because further south that is a pretty standard practice, and I understand that's a part of the cropping system. But usually in those areas, they have a little time where they can get a cereal rye in, like after those double crop beans come off. In my area, our double crop beans don't come off till around Thanksgiving is when we like to have them off. There's not much time to have anything to grow after that. So again, just real quick, I'm just showing you here, we get yield benefits after we plant a cover crop, after our small grains. We get yield benefits for our following corn crop. This is my take-home message. Okay, here's another one. In this case here, it's a totally different field, different year, everything. If you just want to go to the chase, cut the chase here, the bottom shows you there, we got a 12 bushel yield increase when we planted cover crops after the small grain. Now, if you're interested, you'll see the nitrogen rates there, where we had 0 nitrogen, half rate of nitrogen, full rate of nitrogen. It didn't matter what rate of nitrogen when you compare it against themselves. Wherever we had cover crops, we always had higher yields. And I've seen this so many times now that I'm very confident in it, in the accuracy of this statement. That cover crops, no doubt, can give you higher current yields the following year. Now, this is a very complex slide, and just saying, I'm not going to go through this whole thing. I just wanted to show you that in this example here, where you look at the planting dates, and on the left-hand side over here, August the 18th, September 5th, October the 3rd is the planting dates. And when we planted early, after a small grain, we got a nice yield bump here that really is significant over a control. And again, that's what I'm just trying to prove, the effect that cover crops can have after a small grain. Now, we want to run the numbers, and I'm sort of a numbers guy. I don't, portray to be like, know my cost of production down to the penny. But when you pile this all together, and I actually added everything up, divided it out, I got an average over 4 different specific times that we checked. 16 bushels increase to corn yield the following year. Well, depending how you figure corn, a little under $4, that's $60 per acre more profit. So if you're just crunching numbers, it's like, this is worth talking about. Now, again, I'm not saying that your wheat or your small grain would have given as much profit as corn or maybe soybeans. Probably wouldn't be hard to beat them this year. But think of all the other benefits you're getting as well, and so forth. So these are just some of this is where I kind of come out. If, again, the price of nitrogen increases because of the availability or the opportunity to use cover crops, to use legume cover crops to provide for your corn, this number could even be higher, or at least the profit margin could even be higher if you can cut your nitrogen costs. So how about if I stop there for a second to see if there's any comments on this here, the profitability of this, and I'm going to wrap it up with giving some specifics here of how you can actually do this. I want to go a little bit deeper in that, but anyone have any comments so far? What I've said here about the validity of using small grains. Anything you want to add, or any comments you have? How about Dave? Are you still on, Dave, from Illinois. You're in the
Yeah.
corn soybean mecca. It's corn
Yeah.
soybeans and hardly anything else. What's your read on what I'm talking about here today? Is this total hogwash to the typical farmer, or is there something here that maybe we need to be looking at?
No, absolutely. I was actually in a meeting last week down by Carbondale, and with a group of, I don't know, there's probably 15 or so farmers in there talking about cover crops and small grains and stuff. And actually, what you just brought up about the corn following a wheat, there was a couple farmers that had made the comment that their corn yields were always a little better when they followed a wheat.
Okay.
And that goes back to even, you know, a lot of guys were doing some red clover in with their wheat too, kind of frost seeding it, and then using that as taking that stubble hay off, clover hay, for cattle feed, and still getting a little bit of a nitrogen benefit.
Right.
But another thing you mentioned about barley too, and in this area, the wineries are really popping up, but so are these micro breweries, and they're really looking for a barley source. So, that's been kind of beneficial for a few guys. We're able to take it off a little bit sooner, a couple weeks before wheat.
Yep.
So we get an opportunity for a longer seeding window for our summer covers, or if we went in there with a double crop soybean. And some guys are actually capitalizing on the straw, barley straw, and selling it to people to throw into their lakes and stuff to help control algae.
Yep.
And we're talking like $10 a bale for a small square.
Oh, no, we're talking. They probably don't need about.
You bet.
They probably don't need 50 tons, but even so, that's a nice, just do a field. There you go.
Well, there's one guy that had a contract with the state, so he was making okay, I'm sure.
Oh, good.
As long as the state was paying their bills.
Well, okay. Well, that's right. You're from Illinois, but I guess I'll leave it there. No, see, I love what you said there, David, because what I heard was innovation. I heard some innovation from different farmers, and actually the malting barley. I'm glad you mentioned that because I'm actually been growing that the last 2 years, and we're not a good area to grow barley, but they want the local stuff. They want the local stuff for these local craft beers, and it's just like 15 years ago you couldn't have given it to anybody. So these are some opportunities that are cropping up that are really good. Other comments?
Yeah.
One more. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, even for the cattle feed side, or for feed in general, barley's really good feed that can help supplement some of the corn out there too.
Yeah, right. So, I see Stephanie, your mic is on. Is on. You have a comment?
Actually, I do. I'm interested in what you said about how that you said that wheat isn't going to give us as much profit as corn or soybeans. Yet, I know I've in the past few years, especially when I was working up in Minnesota, had worked with numerous farmers who felt that because of the yields that they could get with their wheat and the fact that the input cost for the wheat was so much less than corn, that they felt that was their profitable crop on some of those years where corn prices weren't that great. And so I always think that I feel like people saying, well, you don't make any money with wheat or it's not very profitable. I feel like that's just an excuse people look at saying because we just assume that those costs for corn are just, well, that's the standard of how we do it. And so I really feel like we need to push that assumption out of the way and really look at it. And I know that it is not this. I mean, what you get for wheat is not the same as what we get for corn when we're selling that. But again, I think there's innovative options for going out there. And when you can sell your straw, that adds that profit to the straw a lot more than anyone thinks about.
Absolutely. And I would just add a little bit that wheat's going to take less nitrogen than corn. But it's also probably almost consistently less herbicides, at least cost per acre, which the farmers don't tend to think about that because they just don't know. It's like, they just look at the price and they say they do the math with the bushels and they don't think that it's actually cost of production is lower. Now you can get some money wrapped up in it for some of these high intensive managed wheat with multiple fungicides and all that. I'm not going to get into that today because some farmers, they push the pencil and they really, stay on top of that kind of stuff. But that's a great point you made there, Stephanie. So I want to move on here just to kind of wrap up, and then you'll have some more questions. But I have a few things listed that will help us kind of navigate if you're going to do this. What are some things to know? Well, first of all, is manure being applied or not? That's a big question, and it doesn't happen on a lot of farms, but if manure is applied or the field is high in fertility, you want to use a cover crop mix that basically scavenges nitrogen. The radishes, oats, annual ryegrass, sorghum Sudan grass. Some of them would be appropriate, or kind of tilt your mix toward that. Now, if there's zero nitrogen there, you want to lean it more toward legumes. And some of the more popular ones over the summer is sun hemp, cowpeas, crimson clover, and hairy vetch. I will tell you that crimson clover and hairy vetch that you may have been used to overwintering, if you plant it like in summer, it'll grow and it'll really, really grow then in the fall, but it'll probably winter kill. If it gets over a foot or 14 inches tall, it'll probably winter kill. So some people have been a little disappointed thinking that their winter annuals were going to overwinter, but if you plant them early, that's something to watch out for. And of course, you need to think about what your intended crop is for next year. If it is corn, you want to lean it more toward legumes to provide some more nitrogen. If it's soybeans, you want to lean it a little bit more toward grasses. So that's just kind of a technical thing of how to make use of it. As far as the timing, this is some decisions that need to be made when you plant your cover crop after the small grain harvest. So most of the time, I would say you want to plant it ASAP, as soon as the straw's out of the field, as soon as the combine leaves the field. There are a few things to consider, though. Again, what is your objective? One of the choices is to wait 2 weeks to clean up volunteer small grain or any weeds that may be growing or maybe tiny and spindly. Because depending on how your small grain crop was, I mean, I've seen anything from zero weeds to it's green with weeds. There's a lot of factors go into that. So if you have a lot of weeds there, you want to spray them out. And it's good to leave them grow 10 days or 2 weeks after harvest so they kind of start regrowing and can be able to be killed better. And then also, if you are going to go after perennial weeds, you have to let them grow for 4-6 weeks sometimes. So there's something you have to manage. Is the whole field perennial weed problem, or is it just spots? Should you plant the whole field in cover crop and then come back and just spray out those spots that are perennial weed, killing your cover crop as well in there? These are like little things that nobody talks about when you're at meetings, but I've been there. I've done it. And I'm trying to make these decisions. If it's me, I always try to have something growing. For instance, in my wheat fields this year, about 10% of the areas had some grass growing. It's because we had a lot of rain back there in May, and it was able to get germinated at that point. And I didn't, when I come back with my cover crop, I didn't want that 4-6 inch high grass to smother out my cover crop. So I literally spot sprayed my field be right when I planted the cover crop, so that wouldn't hinder my cover crop. It's just a little pro tip right there on what you need to do for that. So just wanted to show you this picture here, this next picture. I actually took this picture this morning because it illustrates one of the points here that I'm trying to say with the cover crops, volunteer, and so forth. So basically, this picture will come up here soon. There's a little bit of delay. But basically, in the back of my combine, if you see the center part of that picture is where the windrow was. Now, this was black oats. Black oats has light seed, and I was harvesting this for seed production to sell as a cover crop. So I had to fan speed, we'll say, at a little higher setting. I wanted to blow out the light kernels anyway. and I'm baling my straw. So right there in the windrow, I have a pretty good volunteer oats coming up. And if you can kind of look at that picture, you can see how the mixed cover crop was there doesn't quite look as lethargic, look as good. It's a little lethargic. The oats is taking up available nitrogen, but in this case here, we've had, as you guys probably know, we've had a lot of rain, so everything grew. Now, this field was very clean. There wasn't, I mean, I hardly did any spot spraying at all. But I wanted to get a cover crop planted here because I intend to cut this for forage, make a one cut forage out of this. So that's what I'm going to do. And that's just another thing I'm going to mention briefly later on, that if you have an opportunity for forage, this is another reason to use small grains. So my thought is in about 2 to 3 weeks, we'll say 3 weeks, this will be ready to cut. And I'm going to have some pretty good quality forage there with what's regrowing. So yeah, it looks a little bit streaky there with the windrows and everything, but you know, it's kind of like it's compromise, and I'm okay with this in this situation here. How that will translate onto my corn or whatever I plant here next year, I'm not exactly sure right now, but I just want to show you that. That's actually a picture I just took this morning on my farm, and just show you how that works. So, just getting a little bit more specific here on what species to plant. There are definitely lots and lots of options on what you can plant. Some of the more popular ones that you're probably familiar with anyway is sun hemp, sorghum, Sudan grass, millet, radish, buckwheat, cowpeas, oats. And there's a lot of other ones out there. I mean, I planted a 12-way mix that actually had okra in it. And if you haven't heard, okra is kind of like the new, what would you say, cutting edge cover crop mix over the summer. You may say, well, why okra? Well, it's because it has a really good tap root for a summer growing plant. So we'll see. It's the first I planted. I got 44 acres of it, and it's not that thick, but anyway, it's just part of the mix there. So another example is just wanted to show you a picture of what sorghum, Sudan grass, sun hemp, and radish looks like. This is a really good one because you have the quick growth of the sun hemp and sorghum Sudan, and then you have the radishes that come on later at frost. After the first frost, this is a picture of what happens after the first frost. There's two summer annuals get killed from the frost, and the radishes come to life. And one of the more popular basic mixes that are out there. And if you're interested in seeding rates, I have some listed, but basically you'd want to plant them about 2 months before the average first killing frost. Now, if you're later in your small grain harvest, this is not an option here to plant this. So if you're looking for weed suppression, you need to up the rates accordingly, and I just have them there. But you don't uprate the radish rate. Never go over 3 pounds of radish because it'll just be too much. So that's why that rate is maintained the same there. Another popular one, and this is more easier to do, is just radishes and oats, where they're going to be winter killed and in most areas of the country. So it just provides an opportunity for someone just starting out to try this. I always recommend that as like the starter because it's so easy. If a 12-way mix intimidates someone. So anyway, one of the things about radishes is that, and you saw that data earlier on there, how it really does show advantages, is the ability for them to actually do what you see all the pictures of them. One of the biggest things that I heard when I was in the seed business is people will plant them and they don't have this 3-inch diameter tuber and sticking up out of the ground 6 inches, and they think they don't have anything if they don't have that. Well, that's not really true. The taproot really goes down there, but you got to give it some time. And even though I'll just stick on radishes a second here, even though the radishes do a lot of good things and they don't have to grow like big, But if you really want radishes to kind of like maximize the potential, you're going to either have to have a really short season corn or bean or else after small grains. So this is that opportunity to take advantage of all the great things that radishes do. And that's just a picture I have right there of we found roots 6 feet 2 inches deep when we dug out soil pits. The first couple of years I was digging soil pits, I wasn't digging them deep enough because we found roots even lower. And I've been mentioning here about double crop soybeans. I know Jen Nelson's on here from Delaware. That's a big part of their program. I'm not really, I guess you'd say, going against them down there, but I don't know, Jen, what's your opinion here on double crop soybeans, even in your area that's further south? Do you have a comment on that?
Well, I had a question with it because most people do have double crop soybeans if they have small grains over the winter, right? So when you're planting, well, even I think just in a corn and soybean rotation, more than that, is like if you have a corn and bean rotation, when do you fit legumes in a mix?
Right.
You know, because you're either coming off of soybeans or you're coming off of corn. Like, so if you're coming off of corn, you're trying to capture nitrogen that you don't need for your soybeans. If you're coming off of soybeans, you're also trying to capture nitrogen, you know, that's left over from your soybeans going into corn. So, like, I've always wondered about that.
Well, I mean, I guess I was going to ask you the question too. Do you know of any farmers in your area? I mean, you're kind of really solidly into double crop soybeans after small grains. Is there any farmers who are actually switching to cover crops, looking at the big picture? Is there anybody doing that?
I don't know of anybody that's doing that.
Well, I understand that. Now up my way, you know, it's becoming there's more and more every year. There's more and more, but you're a little further south. And that's where, you know, the decision is a little bit different regarding that. So, but yeah, the question your question is still out there. How do you get legumes into the rotation? And I guess my answer to you, knowing a little bit about your area, is you get your corn off in pretty good time, end of August, beginning of September, and there would be plenty of time to plant a hairy vetch or crimson clover at that point. Is that an option? Is that part of an answer to your question?
But then you're going into soybeans the next year.
Oh, I see. So, okay. Yeah. So you're kind of stacking the legume. Well, I don't know. Maybe there's a compromise there to mix a little legume with a cereal rye and using that legume to help grow the cereal rye. But then again, you probably have some people who are spreading poultry litter, right?
I have people who are doing a little bit of everything.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I don't know. Again, maybe this is where cover crop mixes would come in there a little bit stronger. It might be something to think a little bit about, but so good question. Well, I'm going to kind of wrap up here just saying that there are opportunities with small grains. They definitely, I had mentioned they could add forage as a potential forage opportunity for some of you, something that I've certainly done. Less herbicides and less fertilizer. Generally, when you look at this, just very basically, that is true. But for some people who are, I'd say, really kind of ramping this up and really taking advantage of it, I know for myself, that's one point I have about not planting the double crop soybeans, where I are able to plant. Now this picture here is taken again this morning. This was after wheat. This is a 12-way mix, and yeah, there's okra in there somewhere. But what I am going to be doing is taking one cutting off for forage to sell to my Amish neighbors. Actually, you can see his silo there in the background. I tried to convince him to bring his heifers out to graze that, and he just didn't want to do it. So I'm going to cut it off and wrap it as high moisture and put the bales there for him. Then I'm going to leave it grow. It'll grow back. I'm hoping 2 to 3 feet tall, so I have a good cover over the winter. So that's just some example of why I am no longer growing double crop soybeans. I think, a better way for the soil. Even I think it works out better for me from an economic standpoint. And man, it's just good to have all that diversity there. That just makes me smile when I see that. And this field's right by my house. Every morning I get up when the sun comes up, I see this, and it's just, again, it's just like, it is a good feeling. I don't know if some of you can relate to that or not, but I do. That, I don't know, that's worth something in itself. But finally here, I want to give an option that may really get some people interested, and that is to grow your own cover crop seed. For those who are into cover crops, growing cereal rye, triticale, and oats, some of the easiest seeds there are to grow. And I know that David from Illinois, I see he's off now, but he had said that there was before we started recording here in the beginning, he had mentioned that some farmers in Illinois are actually growing red clover as for seed production. And maybe you even want to get to the point where you sell seed to your neighbor. If you do that, go back to the webinar and look about how you do that legally. There's some things to know. But this could be an option to plant a field for your own needs or for your neighbors. Or you can even grow for a company. There's some things you got to do to make that happen, right? But I think this in itself would be maybe one of the more compelling reasons to try to add some cover crops into your farm and maximize your opportunity by creating that window with small grains. So I'm going to open it up for questions, but I'm really excited to share what we have coming up for next week here. I am going to add a little different dynamic to our weekly webinars. I'm going to start interviewing cover crop experts. And I'm going to start with Dr. Ray Weil. Dr. Ray Weil is at the University of Maryland, and he influenced and impacted me greatly. He's the one who brought what later became the tillage radish to my farm. My farm is where I like to call it the birthplace of the tillage radish, but it was because of Dr. Ray Weil. And so I'm going to have him on live. And we have other ones. I have other ones beginning to get their dates coordinated here. As you can imagine, it's a little challenge to do all that, but I want them live because I want you guys to be able to ask them questions directly. I mean, how many chances do you get to ask some of these people questions, or else just to hear them again? Or some of you, a lot of these will be familiar names to you. And I want to get some people who can cover some areas that I'm not as experienced with. Like, I've been requested a couple times to talk about how to grow cover crops in high saline soils where salinity is a problem. I have a guest I'm working on to get assigned to do that. So I'm calling this the Ask the Expert series. So, but because of scheduling, I can't promise it'll be like once a month. It may be back to back. Sometimes it may be nobody for a couple weeks, but I'm really excited about that. I'm really excited about this. So wanted to let you know that, but also want to just wrap up today here. Any comments on today's topic about growing small grains in a way to maximize cover crops? Are there any questions that anybody has or comments out there?
This is Brent Larson, Fort Dodge, Iowa. I've got a comment and then a couple of questions.
Yep.
Yes, we can definitely grow cover crop seed. We're doing that on our own farm for our own use, and that's an interesting foray. The question about how to integrate cover crops or a small grain into a corn bean rotation that I think Jen asked. I think that the answer to that is, in our area anyway, of north central Iowa, in predominantly row crop world, is it requires a paradigm shift to where we like you mentioned, Steve, farmers don't see the value in small grains. They just write them off initially. We can't do it. We don't grow them here because it doesn't work. Well, it's going to require a paradigm shift for people in my area and even our own personal farmland.
Excellent point.
The two questions I have, specifically looking at your oats that fell out behind your combine. Someone just mentioned to me yesterday the integrated Harrington seed destructor from Australia.
Yes.
It actually is like a a mill or
Yes.
a hammer mill that pulverizes the seeds into like flour out the back, and
Correct.
so you have those seeds coming out the back. Does anyone have that or have any experience with that, or comments on that?
Anybody on here have experience? I know about it, Brent, but does anybody have experience with that?
No.
Okay. Yeah, I think, is it available in the U.S. now, Brent?
It doesn't look like it's not, but
Okay.
it looks like it's probably, I'm guessing, a $20,000 add-on to a newer powerful combine. It would take some serious acres to amortize that cost over, but if 2,000 acre or more row crop farmer had that equipment already,
yeah,
and they were doing cover crops, I've been to some meetings around the country where some people have several thousand acres. It seems like almost a no-brainer to pulverize any seed coming out of your combine to get ahead of it.
Yeah, and the reason they're doing it in Australia is basically because of the herbicide-resistant weeds that they just can't kill, and they're trying to keep the weed population down by that very thing. And so I'm not aware. It seems to me, I think I saw it might be available here in the U.S., but I wouldn't be sure. You said the brand name was Harrington?
Yeah, Integrated Harrington. Mr. Harrington discovered it. It's ihsd.com.
Okay.
And when I hover over dealers, it only has Australia, so maybe you're correct. It's still not international.
I know that's pretty much where I believe it was invented. So.
My other question was,
yes.
We have a cover crop field, 25 acres that we, Practical Farmers of Iowa is encouraging people like me to put rye in and then frost seed in some clover and then leave the clover as green manure for next year's corn. That field, obviously had a grass and a broadleaf, so it had no herbicide. So the weeds were pretty thick because we had a terrible growing season to start off with. We had snow in April, and as soon as it warmed up, the weeds and the rye got rolling.
Yep.
So we got the cover crop seed harvested. Now the clover is coming on really nicely, and so are the weeds, especially the mare's tail. So my question is, can we cut that here the last week of August and still get significant enough regrowth of the clover to provide 100 pounds of N for 2019's corn crop?
I'll provide. Okay. Anybody else have a quick comment, and then I'll give you a perspective. Anybody else give a quick comment on that?
I know we have some farmers here in Indiana that are doing that, and they take it for one cutting, and they've had really good success with that, and they are seeing nitrogen bumps for the next year. But that is a difference in geography and elevation. Right. So I can get you those people's names if you'd like to ask them some questions.
I would love to.
Okay, I'll
all right.
If you guys have each other's, I can hook you up. I'll just make a note of it.
Sounds
here.
Good.
Narson and Stephanie. Okay. My comment, Brent, is I'm not sure if you could count on 100 pounds of nitrogen from the red clover next year, but it is, as Stephanie said, it's common practice to take a cutting in the fall if you have enough growth and everything for hay, and then it regrows really nicely for the next spring. So I think the theory is absolutely dead on, and you want to take that mare's tail out before it goes to seed. And if you have a lot of mare's tail, you may just want to rotary mill it or something just to trim it down. But even if you're trimming the red clover at that time, that's actually probably good for it, and maybe will enhance it. Whether you get 100 pounds or not, I wouldn't count on that. At least the first year. That's my little caveat to that.
Okay, yeah.
Hey, Steve?
I have no idea about clover husbandry, so I don't know how high or low we should cut it, but I feel like we need to get that mare's tail cut out of there and allow the clover to come back.
Go ahead, Stephanie.
I was going to say, I think you were kind of on the right trail with that, because if you think about that red clover growing right now, if it does go to flower, typically our legumes plants kind of reduce their nitrogen production as they go into the reproductive state. So by cutting it, you might actually keep it more in that, you will keep it in that vegetative state, and likely keep the nitrogen production going, and hopefully maybe increase what you can get, so that it's kind of going and keeping moving for next year.
Agreed.
That
Totally.
would be another way to think about that. Yeah.
Agreed. If you're looking for a cutting height, I would target 6 inches, 4 to 6 inches, Brent, because you don't want to get too much cut off to make a mat of residue. You want it just and high enough so that the residue you do cut off, that then it can kind of regrow out of that. That's my thought. Again, that's just without seeing the field. Yeah. So, is there any more follow up on that? That's a great question. Okay. Any other questions from anybody about our topic, or any other cover crop question you might have this week? Go ahead,
Steve.
Stephanie.
I'm wondering about the thank you. About the opportunities for growing that cover crop seed.
Yes.
I'm just curious about anybody else out there having this experience where, if you are buying cover crop seed, especially if you are maybe a larger vendor, are you having trouble getting quotes from people selling cover crop seed because it's in such high demand? Or, thinking about that as, again, another economic source for you that, Steve said earlier, nitrogen is a decent price right now, but it might be high.
Yeah.
That's the same argument for cover crop seed. And this might be a year where we see prices of cover crop seed going up. And so if you are growing your own, you're saving yourself that extra cost.
So, Wayne,
and I do think that this has been a year that's high.
Yeah, Wayne, are you still on, Wayne? I know Wayne's involved in cover crop seed a little bit. If you're on, Wayne, I wouldn't mind you commenting on any shortages you see on cover crops, particularly with the grains that are easy to grow. Do you have any perspective? I do then when you're done.
Yeah, I missed part of your question there. I had actually answered a phone call.
Understood.
There. You were saying, yeah, you were saying cover crops seed.
Yeah, is there any shortages you're seeing this year? Is there any basically the question is there opportunities for farmers to grow their own seed? Because okay, there's
a huge shortage of triticale right now.
Right.
In fact, I had orders for almost 100,000 pounds that I'm not sure I'm going to be able to fill.
Yep.
And that's a winter forage type triticale. Obviously, fridge is probably the most common one. We had a grower grow for us in Kansas this year. He doubled his acres from last year, from 300 acres to 600 acres, but they were really dry and ended up probably not getting as much as he even did last year.
Yep.
So I'm trying to get some out of Montana here, which should be harvested here probably next week, but everybody's all over it. So the price has almost doubled just this year alone on triticale.
Wow. Cereal rye?
Cereal rye is a short supply as well, not as bad as triticale. We're still able to get it. We're actually buying out of Canada right now for that. Triticale is coming. There's crop in Canada for triticale this year. It's not harvested yet. Won't be harvested probably for another 2 weeks. But they're saying they've been very dry and they don't expect it to be real great. So. Well,
that pretty much mirrors what I've been hearing. I was just in Albuquerque, New Mexico this past week. I actually saw some cover crop innovator people there, which was cool. But the word on the street is there's shortages of cereal rye and triticale. So it's exactly right, Wayne. And to your point, Stephanie, boy, if farmers would have, it's too late to wind back the clock. But if there would have been great opportunity, I'll pretty much guarantee you more money to be made in growing cover crop seed this year than any corn or soybeans will ever give you. Now, we didn't know that a year ago. I'm just saying, but that could spill into next year. The market the guys who are into this can react fairly quickly, but as Wayne said, there was large areas of the growing region was dry, plus the increased demand, in spite of low commodity prices, I will add. The demand is there, and I know last week Risa said the same thing. She's with Grassland, Oregon. There's going to be some shortages this year, and coupled with that, our topic 2 weeks ago, what to do about an earlier than expected harvest, which it looks like that's coming to fruition in some significant areas of the Corn Belt. So I do predict that there will be shortages.
And that's driving a lot of demand, Steve. We're the large parts of the Corn Belt are between 2 to 3 weeks early, and everybody's like, "Hey, now I got a bigger window. I can plant cover crop."
I know. Well,
we try to tell our guys, buy early, get your cover crop seed secured early, because you wait till the last minute and you come up short.
But to play devil's advocate, Wayne, that's what all cover crop salesmen say. They just, I know, but I've that's part of the tactic, and you got to get your stuff ordered because you never know, when there's going to be a shortage and so forth. So that's why it's so important to have a good relationship with your dealer to actually do what you said. So I was joking there, but I just had to say that.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody on this call, I don't know what areas everybody's from, but annual ryegrass is another one that's very short this year. It's almost non-existent.
Yeah, it's good to mention. Annual ryegrass is tough to grow. That's not your easy cover crop to grow. Pretty much
I know.
have to swath.
That's why I said I don't know who's on here, but
right. I don't see anybody on it is, but for whatever it's worth, annual ryegrass is it up 50% for the price, Wayne? About from last year?
Yeah, it might be up even more than that. Yeah. We had bought a bunch last year and then had left over and turned around and sold it back to a big distributor in Oregon. And
good.
And we actually made good money on it, just sitting on it for a couple months.
Yeah, well, it works out sometimes.
I went back to buy it, and he said, "Nope, I don't have any, none."
Wow.
So
yeah, well, that's just the nature of it. Go ahead.
I had heard from someone that it's where cereal rye is being harvested up in Canada, that they're actually feeding it to some of their livestock, in particular pigs now. Have you guys heard that?
Nope.
Okay, there was somebody that had been purchasing seed, and that some of that is now being used to feed to pigs. So I think that's an interesting source of a food source for livestock. But again, another demand on that grain. From other people out there. So that was something I was going to try to follow up on and see if that was really the case.
That's good to know. I never heard that.
That's interesting. I wonder why they're feeding it to pigs.
The biggest.
If it has something. Go on.
No. Finish your comment there, Stephanie.
I think it has something maybe to do with the meat color.
Really? So there's actually. Oh wow, that's interesting. I never heard that. See, most of the competition for cereal rye is a lot of it with flour for rye bread. Now that's not a big market, but still, in the context of worldwide demand, it takes up quite a few acres. So when there's plenty of a flour type rye, it just gets dumped into the cover crop market. No big deal. Yeah. But now that's interesting. If they found something the cereal rye does for a desirable meat production, that's going to be interesting. I'll just say this: rye is easy to grow. If there is solid demand, that will be met. I would say relatively soon, if that's the case. Brent is asking here, where does most of the annual ryegrass seed come from? I would say, Wayne, you correct me if I'm wrong, but 90% comes out of the Willamette Valley of Oregon. Is that close?
Yeah, a lot of it does, but there's also some pretty much is being grown in northern Minnesota too now.
Oh, okay.
Some going on up there, but yeah, Oregon's kind of the popular place for it.
Yeah, and it's just pretty much because of the weather. It needs to have fairly dry weather over the summer. You want to be able to swath it. So if you're swathing anything, you don't want much rain. That could really messes you up. And just the special equipment that it needs, because it's such a light seed. And the knowledge of just how to set your combines and little additional parts to your combines to make it work right, and seed cleaning. That's why the whole industry, pretty much seed industry, developed in the Willamette Valley, because of the weather they have there, and that birthed the seed industry then. Because that's the place to grow a lot of these grasses. So anyway, that's the answer to your question there, Brett. But well, this has been an awesome discussion. I appreciate your involvement today. I would be open to one more question if you have it, but it's about time to wrap this up. Any other questions? Anybody?
I have one last comment.
Okay, you're the one.
I think the early harvest that driving our demand for cover crops this year, I think we're going to want to keep an eye on it, because usually if demand is going up because of an early harvest, this is someone who probably hasn't adopted cover crops fully yet. And all of a sudden this might be a negative experience for them. Oh, the price is so high because they're jumping in at the last minute. I think that's something that we're going to really need to get those people to come back and say, hey, this was just a bad year. You jumped in late. I just feel that that's going to be an opportunity for really negative experiences for newcomers.
Yeah, well, to your point, I hear you. But to your point, I was going to say this a couple times in the last 15 minutes in our discussion here, but farmers are primed like never before to do cover crops. So
yes,
in a way, it's like for those of us who are excited to see the cover crop acres increase, this is the kind of season we've been waiting for. But I also hear the reality for some farmers. They're going to say, "Oh, I can plant cover crops. Oh, they're really expensive, or I can't even get it." So yeah, we'll have to deal with that. That's what we as educators and trainers do. So just explaining it to them, and they'll that helps them get ready for the next time or whatever.
I agree.
Yeah. Well, on that note, thanks again for your time today. I appreciate all the questions. We certainly had a lot of them today. And I hope you can join next week with my interview with Dr. Weil and get a question ready for him. So have a great week.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye.